New details have surfaced about what Bryant Dragon Arnold's life has become since his sudden disappearance from the secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and what insiders are now revealing is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. For 3 seasons, Dragon stood as the ranch's protector, its enforcer, the man who guarded the boundary between our world and whatever waited beyond it. But something happened to him out there, something that didn't just push him away from the cameras, something that followed him home. Tonight, we uncover the tragic reality of Dragon's life after Skinwalker Ranch, and why those who knew him say he's never been the same. The ranch didn't just change Dragon, it marked him, and according to people close to the situation, that mark has become a curse he can't escape. What you're about to hear goes beyond anything shown on television. This is the story of a man who dedicated everything to protecting others from the unknown, only to become its primary target. From unexplained encounters that were never filmed, to the psychological breakdown that forced him to walk away, to the haunting reality of his life today. Dragon's story is a warning about what happens when you stare too long into the abyss, and the abyss decides to stare back. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. Bryant Arnold wasn't supposed to disappear. He was the kind of man who seemed permanent, rooted to the land like the mesa itself. For years, he was more than just security. He was the last line of defense, the one person Brandon Fugel trusted above all others to keep the ranch secure. Dragon didn't just protect the property from trespassers or curious tourists. He protected the world from what lived beneath that cursed ground. His presence alone was a deterrent, not just to people, but to whatever forces seemed to pulse through that valley. But in the spring of his final season, something fundamental changed. The crew noticed it first. Dragon stopped engaging in casual conversation. He avoided the command center unless absolutely necessary. He triple-checked locks on doors that had never needed checking before. His patrols became longer, more erratic, as if he was searching for something or running from something he couldn't name. And then one morning, without any warning or explanation, he drove off the property and never came back. No press release, no farewell episode, no official statement, just gone. What most people don't know is that Dragon didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because staying meant losing himself completely, surrendering to something that had been circling him for years. And according to those close to him, that surrender is exactly what's happening now. The man who once seemed unshakable has become a shadow of his former self, haunted by experiences that refuse to stay buried. Dragon's disappearance wasn't an ending. It was an escape attempt, and tragically, it didn't work. Dragon's unraveling didn't start when the cameras were rolling. It started years before, during his earliest patrols on the ranch, long before the show ever aired. Back then, he reported strange disturbances to Brandon Fugel, things he couldn't easily explain or rationalize, lights that moved against the wind direction, shadows that stretched impossibly long across the ground at noon, cold spots that appeared without warning in the middle of summer heat. And one night, alone on the West Ridge during a routine patrol, he saw it for the first time, a shimmering distortion hovering several feet above the ground, twisting the air around it like heat rising from asphalt on a scorching day. But the temperature wasn't hot, it was freezing cold. Dragon froze in place. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't radio for help. He didn't move at all. He just stood there in the darkness, watching as the thing watched him back. There was an intelligence to it, a presence that felt aware and calculating. Then, without warning, it vanished. Not faded gradually, not drifted away. It simply ceased to exist, like someone had flipped a switch and removed it from reality. Dragon never filed an official report about the incident, never told the scientists what he'd witnessed, never mentioned it on camera or in any interview. But from that night forward, he carried himself differently, like a man who knew he'd been marked, tagged, chosen for something he couldn't yet understand. And as the years passed and the show began filming, Dragon realized with growing dread that he was right. Whatever had watched him that night on the West Ridge hadn't forgotten him. It was waiting, observing, planning its next move. The moment that truly began pulling Dragon away from the show happened late one night near the south fence line. During what should have been a routine perimeter check, Dragon was walking the property with 2 crew members after strange radio interference spiked across every channel simultaneously. They expected to find trespassers, maybe teenagers trying to sneak onto the property, or perhaps just an equipment malfunction. Instead, the temperature dropped so hard and so fast that all 3 men's breath hung thick in the air like dense fog. Even the insects stopped making sound. The silence was oppressive, unnatural, wrong. That's when Dragon noticed it. a tall figure standing motionless on the ridge, silhouetted against the night sky, backlit by nothing but pale moonlight. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, his mind filling in patterns where none existed. Then it moved, not like a human being, not like any animal he'd ever tracked. It shifted sideways across the ground without taking a single step, gliding as if the laws of physics didn't apply to it. One of the camera operators whispered urgently, "What the hell is that?" But Dragon didn't answer. His hand hovered over his sidearm, not drawing the weapon, just bracing himself for whatever might come next. The figure paused at the base of the mesa slope, seeming to regard them with invisible eyes. Then it vanished, not walked away into the darkness, not ran. It simply blinked out of existence like a light being switched off. Dragon stepped forward slowly, almost against his will, as if pulled by a force he couldn't explain or resist. He scanned the ridge methodically, ordered the others to fall back to a safe distance, and attempted to radio base. But the radio shrieked with a metallic warping noise that made both men cover their ears in pain. After the interference finally cleared, Dragon spoke only 2 words into the radio. "Shut it down!" The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened, but everyone on the crew noticed the fundamental change in him. He stared at the mesa longer during his patrol. He stopped joking with the camera crew, and something deep inside him had shifted permanently. Several weeks after the ridge encounter, Dragon was working late, reviewing drone footage alone in the command trailer, what he used to call his safe place. Nothing strange ever happened in that trailer. No cold spots, no equipment failures, no unexplained shadows. It was the one building on the entire property that everyone trusted implicitly. But one night, shortly after midnight, as Dragon sat reviewing surveillance footage in complete solitude, every monitor in front of him froze simultaneously on the exact same frame, a frame that by all logic shouldn't have existed. On every screen, from every camera angle throughout the property, the footage showed the exact same impossible image, a silhouette standing directly behind Dragon inside the trailer, only a few feet from where he currently sat. It wasn't tall or monstrous in the traditional sense, but the proportions were fundamentally wrong, too long, too narrow. The angles bent unnaturally, like something was wearing the shape of a human being, didn't understand how to properly fit inside it. Dragon spun around instantly, hand reaching for his weapon, every muscle tensed for confrontation, but nothing was there. The space behind him was completely empty, yet the air in that spot was ice cold, almost wet, like he'd suddenly opened a freezer door in a humid room. The monitors flickered erratically. The silhouette disappeared from the screen. Then, one by one in sequence, each screen began replaying the last 2 seconds of footage backward without any input from Dragon whatsoever. He hit keys frantically, slammed the power button repeatedly, physically yanked cables from their connection, but it didn't matter. Nothing he did made any different. The screen stayed on, continuing to play impossibly reversed footage of something standing in the exact spot where he had been sitting moments before. The distortion formed a kind of outline around the figure, like static electricity was tracing its edges. But the face was the absolute worst part, blurred and smeared like wet paint dragged across canvas, except 2 dark hollows stared out from the center of it, watching him with terrible focus, evaluating him like a specimen. By the time the system finally powered down completely, Dragon was shaken in a way no one on the crew had ever witnessed before. When the tech team checked all the equipment the next morning, they found absolutely nothing. No corrupted files, no glitch logs, no abnormal activity recorded anywhere in the system. There was no trace of the silhouette, no evidence the monitors had ever malfunctioned, no proof that anything unusual had happened at all. But Dragon knew exactly what he had seen, and from that night forward, he absolutely refused to stay in the command trailer alone under any circumstances. The breaking point came during what should have been just another routine nighttime perimeter sweep. Dragon had completed hundreds of these walks over the years, checking fence lines, monitoring sensors, logging wildlife activity. It was muscle memory by that point. But this particular night, the air felt fundamentally wrong from the moment he stepped outside. Even the other security personnel later admitted they could feel it too. A heaviness pressing down on everything, like the entire ranch was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Halfway through the sweep, Dragon radioed in with something unusual. His voice wasn't panicked, not yet, but it carried an edge the team wasn't accustomed to hearing from him. "Do you copy? I'm getting movement near Sector C, but it's not tripping any of the ground sensors." The command team immediately checked the monitoring system. Dragon was absolutely right. No alerts, no thermal spikes, no motion detection, nothing registering on any equipment, but he kept whispering into the radio that something was pacing him through the trees, staying just barely out of direct sight. He said he could hear it clearly. Slow, deliberate steps, the sound of boots crunching on dirt, the soft push and snap of branches being moved aside. But the thermal drone circling overhead showed only Dragon's heat signature, nothing else. Without warning or explanation, he stopped answering the radio entirely. The command trailer erupted with noise, everyone shouting, scrambling, trying desperately to reach him. By the time the rapid response team arrived at the far corner of the property, they found Dragon standing perfectly still beside the old cottonwood tree near the ravine. His flashlight hung loosely in his hand, beam pointed uselessly at the ground. His pupils were massively dilated despite the bright lights now surrounding him. His breathing was shallow and rapid, like someone who had just witnessed something that shattered their understanding of reality. One of the crew members called his name repeatedly. Dragon didn't react at all. It wasn't until Thomas physically grabbed his shoulder and shook him that Dragon finally snapped out of whatever trance held him, gasping desperately like someone who'd been held underwater for too long. When they frantically asked what had happened, what he'd seen out there in the darkness, he didn't answer coherently. He just kept shaking his head violently, whispering over and over, "You didn't see it. You didn't see what was standing there." The team searched the entire area methodically. No footprints in the soft earth, no thermal traces lingering, no broken branches, absolutely nothing that could explain the absolute terror still trembling through Dragon's body. But when they later reviewed Dragon's body cam footage, something even more deeply unsettling emerged from the recording. At the exact moment Dragon stopped responding to radio calls, the microphone picked up a faint clicking noise in the background, completely unnatural. Not an animal sound, not machinery, something else entirely. Something that seemed to be responding directly to his presence. Then underneath the clicking, barely audible, a low, distorted whisper emerged. Audio technicians tried desperately to isolate the sound, filter it, enhance it, understand its origin. But the deeper they analyzed the waveform, the stranger it became. The pattern wasn't consistent with any known human voice. It wasn't mechanical interference. It existed somewhere in between, something that shouldn't be possible. When they showed Dragon the isolated audio clip, he refused to listen to it. After the terrifying incident at the cottonwood tree, Dragon attempted to return to his normal work routine as if nothing significant had happened, but the crew immediately noticed something had fundamentally changed. He was more guarded than ever before, more restless, constantly looking over his shoulder, and for the first time since joining the team years ago, Dragon started keeping critical information off the official record. It began when he insisted on reviewing all overnight surveillance footage completely alone, arriving hours before the rest of the team each morning. At first, nobody questioned this behavior. They assumed he was simply trying to make sense of his recent experiences, searching for patterns or explanations. But then the system logs revealed something deeply odd and concerning. Several files had been accessed, viewed multiple times, and then manually copied into a heavily encrypted folder under Dragon's personal login credential. Footage that was suddenly no longer accessible to anyone else on the team, including Brandon Fugel himself. When confronted about this unusual behavior, Dragon brushed it off dismissively as routine security archiving, standard protocol for sensitive material. But the explanation didn't sit right with anyone. He had never done anything like this before in all his years on the property, and he certainly had never locked the investigative team out of potentially crucial data. Then came the night that truly alarmed everyone. Brandon Fugel himself flew in urgently from Salt Lake City, responding to a private message Dragon had sent him directly, bypassing all normal communication channels. The cameras caught their silhouettes inside the command trailer late that night, voices deliberately muted, door firmly locked from the inside. No one on the crew ever learned what Dragon showed Brandon during that secret meeting, but when Brandon finally emerged hours later, he looked visibly rattled, shaken in a way the ranch had never affected him before despite years of bizarre occurrences. The only real clue came from the drone operator, who later swore under oath that he saw Dragon carefully carrying a small metal case out to his personal truck later that evening, something he had retrieved from the restricted storage room where only the highest level evidence was kept under lock and key. Whatever was contained inside that case, Dragon handled it with extreme care, placing it gently on the passenger seat as if it were fragile or dangerous, and then drove off the property without explaining anything to anyone. The next morning when he returned, Dragon was pale, visibly exhausted, and absolutely refusing to discuss where he had gone or what he had done with the contents of that case. But the change in him was unmistakable and deeply troubling. Dragon had always been strict, intense, occasionally paranoid about security, but now he was something else entirely. He was genuinely afraid, not of intruders or trespassers or even the unknown phenomena. He was terrified of something specific, something the ranch had shown him, something he had locked in that metal case, something he desperately feared would change everything if it ever became public knowledge. And from that day forward, Dragon stopped trusting the ranch's monitoring systems entirely. He stopped trusting the investigation's methodology and conclusions. And worst of all, he stopped trusting the crew members he had worked alongside alongside for years. The night everything finally fell apart began quietly enough. The team was gathered in the command center, carefully reviewing anomalies from the previous night's investigation, when one of the central monitors suddenly flickered without warning, just for a single second, barely noticeable. But in that brief moment, the screen displayed something that sent ice through everyone's veins. A frame that absolutely should not exist anywhere in their footage. On the monitor, clear as day, was an image showing a silhouette standing directly behind Dragon in footage recorded the previous night. Tall, unnaturally thin, completely featureless, and Dragon had never reported seeing anyone or anything during that patrol. When Dragon walked into the command center moments later and immediately saw the frozen image still displayed on the screen, he went completely rigid. Every muscle in his body tensed. For several long seconds, he didn't even appear to breathe. "That wasn't there," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Travis stepped forward carefully, studying both the screen and Dragon's reaction. "Dragon, that figure was standing directly behind you in this footage. Are you seriously telling us you didn't see anything unusual during this patrol?" "No," Dragon snapped defensively, but the crack in his voice completely betrayed him. He was lying, or he was in denial, or something far worse. Then the command center radios suddenly hissed with harsh static. Everyone in the room turned toward the speakers simultaneously. A voice whispered through the interference, broken and distant, seemingly impossible to pinpoint or identify. At first, it sounded like random interference, atmospheric noise, radio bounce. Then, unmistakably, crystal clear despite the static, it formed a single word: Brian. The entire team immediately looked at Dragon. His real name, his birth name, only a small handful of people in his entire life ever called him that. Everyone on the ranch knew him exclusively as Dragon. The radio crackled again, louder this time. The whisper stretched and distorted, taking on an unnatural quality, almost mocking in its tone as it repeated his name slowly. Brian. Dragon stood completely frozen, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the desk to steady himself. "That's not normal interference," Travis said quietly, stating the obvious that everyone was thinking. Dragon didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He just stared at the radio speaker, breathing hard through clenched teeth, looking like he was holding back either rage or panic or both. Then the whisper returned one final time, clearer than before, and every single hair on the back of Dragon's neck visibly stood up. Two words that would haunt him forever. "Behind you." Dragon spun around so violently and so fast that he knocked over an expensive equipment chair, sending it crashing to the floor. Nothing was there. The space behind him was completely empty, but the precise moment he turned, the entire command center's temperature dropped at least 20 degrees in seconds. People's breath became visible. The monitoring cameras flickered erratically, and then the same silhouette from the frozen footage appeared again, but this time on a live feed broadcasting in real time, standing in the exact spot where Dragon had been positioned just seconds before. When Dragon saw his own image on the screen with that thing standing where he'd just been, he whispered something that absolutely no one on the crew had ever heard from him before in all their years working together. "I'm done." And for the first time in the entire recorded history of the show, Dragon turned and walked out of the command center without completing a security lockdown protocol. Dragon didn't return to the command center that night. He stayed outside alone, pacing the dirt road toward the gate. Every few minutes he would stop, turn sharply, and stare into the tree line like he expected something to step out. The team watched from monitors, unsure whether to intervene. By sunrise, Dragon was sitting on his truck's tailgate, shoulders slumped, staring at the ground. When Travis approached, Dragon didn't look up. "It's not the ranch," he muttered. "It's me." Travis frowned. "What does that mean?" Dragon took a long breath. "This place doesn't follow you. It chooses you, and something out there chose me a long time ago." He explained that before the show ever aired, before Brandon bought the ranch, something appeared to him on the West Ridge. A shimmering distortion that moved without sound. He never filed a report, never told anyone. "It watched me," he whispered, like it already knew everything about me. The team listened in stunned silence. "And now it's back," he said. "It's following me again." When the crew prepared for the next investigation, Dragon didn't suit up. He walked to Brandon's truck, dropped his security badge on the hood, and said only one sentence: "If I stay here, it won't stop." He climbed into his truck and drove toward the gate. The cameras caught one final shot in his rearview mirror. His face pale, eyes fixed on the mesa behind him. 1 week after Dragon drove off Skinwalker Ranch for the final time, Brandon Fugel quietly confirmed what everyone already knew. Dragon had officially stepped away. No contract dispute, no salary negotiation. He left because something wasn't just observing him anymore. It was calling him by name. But leaving didn't end it. According to those who've seen him since, Dragon's life has become unrecognizable. He lives alone now, far from Utah, in a location he refuses to reveal. Friends say he's reclusive, distrustful of electronics, paranoid about being watched. He checks windows obsessively. He sleeps with lights on. He refuses to discuss the ranch. One former crew member reached him by phone last year. Dragon answered but said only 3 words before hanging up. It's still here. Others report he's moved multiple times, always at night, always without warning, like he's running from something that won't let go. The tragedy of Bryant Arnold isn't that he left Skinwalker Ranch. It's that part of the ranch left with him. And no matter how far he runs, whatever chose him that night on the West Ridge is still watching, still waiting, still calling his name in the dark.